Problem's got to be getting on the tenure track, and sure enough, that's what they found. The big drop-off is we have a lot of women getting PhDs who never get on the tenure track if they're going to have kids. If they're even thinking seriously about having kids anytime soon, they're just like, no, that's going to be too much work. I want to have time for my kids. Women who are married are less likely to enter tenure track positions. It is still the case that women do more housework when they're married than when they're single, regardless of kids. It's not that much more, because guys are doing more housework. They're doing a lot more cooking, right? You might, if you talk to your students about this, a lot of the guys here at the home front would be doing cooking, laundry, not so much. But whatever. And then, of course, we have problems all the way up the line. And it's only some of this is related to family. I don't want to pretend that there's old-fashioned sex discrimination still going on. Yeah. Oops. This was also put together by Mark Golden out at Berkeley. And he was trying to figure out whether or not life is that much worse for faculty, because we're always complaining. And the general public, of course, thinks we have really cushy lives. Look, all you do is you go in when you want, you have to teach a few classes, and then you can go home, and if your kid's got a soccer game, you can take off for that, which I used to do. Or, you know, you have a lot of flexibility, and you don't have a big time commitment. But when you talk to faculty, they have huge time commitments. And Wayne was telling me they're doing a study here now on faculty workload, and I'm pretty confident you're going to find that workload is a serious issue. These aren't cushy jobs. And that's exactly what you find in terms of women having children. Now, this is a cross-section in 5-year age groups from the Census 2000. And what it shows is in this young age bracket, women who are faculty, women who are lawyers, and women who are doctors, that's in green, are unlikely to have children, right? Professional women don't have kids in their 20s. That's pretty unusual. Or the women who do enter after the kids are grown. That's what happens to a lot of people. Then the numbers start going up, but they're going up a lot more rapidly for doctors and lawyers until they peak much higher for doctors and lawyers than they do for academics. Now, it's possible that this is due to biological differences in the proclivity to have children, but I really don't think so. I think what's going on is partly the career track for doctors and lawyers is much more compressed than it is for faculty. The average age for receipt of PhD is 34 and a half now in the US, and there's a lot of variance around that, obviously. And if you add 6 years on top of that to get to tenure, you're in the early 40s. Whereas making partner in a law firm can happen much more quickly. Law school is over in a few years. And getting into medical practice is also much quicker. Yeah?
This was the 2000 census. Do you have any sense of how that might look once the 10 is looked at? I'm just wondering about, is it shifting to the right? You know, that's the common perception that people are waiting even longer.
Yeah, one thing I love about working at IWPR is I know a lot about I know a little about a lot of things, that's what I'm going to say. And one of the things we're going to look at is the birth dearth. And what we don't know right now is whether women are just delaying having kids or they're just choosing not to have them. And if the economy doesn't seriously improve, and the prospects for that don't look very good right now, then I think we're going to have a generation. In California, where I got the early numbers, they had a 7% decline in births from 2007 to 2009. And 7% in the fertility world is huge, right? It's not like the price of milk. It's like a lot of people who aren't being born. So we know, and this is going to ricochet through the school systems. It's going to affect Albright, 18, 20 years down the road. And it also means that the people coming into academic positions, as they are getting hired, a lot of them aren't going to be having these conflicts that we're talking about here, right? And I think that's really important. Actually, I'm glad you brought it up for that reason. It's important to know you're going to have a lot more faculty without family responsibilities. That's likely what the recession is going to do. It's also scaring the Jesus out of a whole generation of young people. And I assume a lot of your graduates, so I'll come back to that as well. Now, I'm going to do 2 pieces of theoretical background. And this is about bias avoidance, which is a concept that we discovered in our research. And if you go back, it's partly based on Joan Williams' new glass ceiling. The original glass ceiling, the notion was that women get so high in any position or organizational structure, and then they're kind of stopped. In Joan Williams' view, the new glass ceiling is children. And once a woman has children, then she doesn't go any further. And we see that, of course, with the recent Supreme Court appointees. So women without kids can rise, and the women with kids don't. And of course, for the men, it's not even an issue, or it wasn't historically. And the other is Virginia Valiant's notion of cumulative disadvantage. And if you, this is a wonderful book called Why So Slow? It's a few years old, but it's very readable. And what Virginia argues is that over time, a lot of little things happen to women that eventually add up. Now, the strongest evidence for that is actually out of a study that came out of Harvard Econ Department, Claudia Gold in 1991. Claudia looked at the evidence on the wage gap. And the gender wage gap, she said, aha, for young women in their 20s, there is no gender wage gap. It's only for the older women, so we think discrimination's disappearing. And then we looked 10 years later, and we saw the same thing, that as the women aged, the wage gap was growing. So that there was, and one of the big contributors we now know, of course, is children, and especially taking time out of the labor force, like a year or 2 or 5 or 10, that's just a huge contributor to the wage gap. But Virginia was also talking about a lot of little small things that would happen. Getting put on the wrong committee, or one where you end up putting in a lot of time without being visible, right? That's not good for your career. Having a lot of different classes assigned to you instead of a smaller number, if that would be possible, so you have more preps. It could be anything like that that serves to slow you down. Not getting networked at professional meetings the way that men are, and so forth. Now, what we discovered was this notion that people engage in strategies in order to avoid encountering bias against caregiving. That is, they either don't make commitments, caregiving commitments, or they minimize the appearance of those commitments. That is, they hide it. For example, I won't tell you who it is because she works not that far from here. You probably know who she is. Woman and I were both in the Department of Labor Studies at Penn State. Now you could find out who she is, please tell. And we both had young kids, young daughters who were in soccer. And when I would go to my daughter's soccer practice, I would go up to the office and tell them, hey, I'm going to you to soccer practice. And they would be like, oh, I'm such a great dad. Isn't that cool? And when she was going to do the same thing, she said, I have a meeting off campus, or I have to work at home. Because if she had said she was going to her daughter's soccer practice, she wouldn't have been taken seriously, right, in the way that I was. I was still viewed as a serious academic. So bias avoidance is this hidden form of gender inequality. You don't even know it's going on if you're just, say, department chair. You don't know that people aren't telling you about caregiving commitments or are choosing not to have children in order to have career success. You don't know that this is going on because they aren't going to talk about it. And the reason that it's not talked about is that to talk about it is to invite experiencing bias against caregiving. Right? It's when young women getting their PhDs ask me, you know, I'm pregnant, I'm on the job market, should I tell them that I'm pregnant? And I say, absolutely, as soon as they offer you a written contract, call them right back. But short of that written contract, you don't tell them. Because if they don't offer you that job, you will never know if this was bias against caregiving or if you just weren't the most qualified person. Do you want to find out? I don't think so. I don't think you tell them. And when you're interviewing for jobs, you shouldn't, and this is actually, I think, it's incumbent on faculty and on search committees to make the information available. You cannot expect job candidates to say, hey, how's the child care here, right? Because if they say that, they aren't playing the game, right? So you have to provide the information to them. You can't expect them to be asked. Yeah. Okay, these are the two research projects that this encompassed. One called the Mapping Project, and It's actually still up at the Penn State website. I don't know for how long. But the articles will exist forever, at least electronically, until the government shuts down the internet, which they're not saying they want to be able to do, apparently. We looked at over 5,000 faculty in English and chemistry at 507 schools, did case studies. The latest article, which compares our findings here with those in a parallel study in Australia, just turned up in the Gender Working Organization. And then at the University of Michigan, another research team surveyed colleges, those same colleges and universities, regarding their policies. What we were hoping to find out was whether the policies actually made a difference. Right? So, I'm not going to get away with the punchline yet, so we'll get there.